For me, photography is not just about capturing beauty or interesting and perhaps quirky subjects. Of course, these are what I hope to be the end result, but the process begins first in my head and in the depths of my soul. I didn't arrive at this way of thinking about art entirely on my own. I'm fortunate enough to be married to my high school sweetheart, who is himself a professor of art and art history. His current PhD studies are heavily based in aesthetics, which is basically a study of the intellect and emotions as they relate to beauty. They all very much work together. He has been a practicing artist longer than I have, if we don't count our shared high school art classes. We have been married throughout the entire course of his education, which has allowed for numerous discussions over the years. We have often discussed the thought processes that take place well before that first brushstroke is made or the first frame is taken. Thoughts which continue to evolve throughout the creative process and help to inform and shape the final image. My husband has been teaching his students for years that there are two critical skills which all artists, no matter their medium, need to develop. These skills are self-criticism and self-editing. Self-criticism can be described as the act of stepping away and analyzing one's own work, determining what works, what doesn't, and why you think that is. It boils down to such basics as line, form, color, and light, and really picking apart the image in these different aspects and analyzing according to which of these elements is working and which are falling short. Self-editing is the emotional skill of distancing yourself from your creation and perhaps even letting it go after you have invested a lot of time and energy. It's the ability to say, even though I love the idea of this image, it just isn't working, and for these reasons, it's time to set it aside. Self-editing isn't always easy. In fact, it's usually painful. In working through self-criticism and self-editing, one begins to develop that sometimes elusive sense of vision so many artists talk about. So, what am I thinking when I first begin to photograph? Many thoughts flood my mind initially. It begins, of course, with attraction to the subject in some way, and also includes assessing the surroundings as well as the quality of the light. These are important and inform me about the probability of actually raising the camera and pressing the shutter, or perhaps not pressing the shutter. Sheer attraction isn't enough. I'm looking for substance. After performing that basic assessment, my thoughts began to move deeper. The images you have seen scrolling help to illustrate the culmination of my thought process. You have been seeing the finished product of several years' worth of work. What you have not seen is the struggle to produce something I deem worthy of actually showing. I think the process of creating art is important to address, the process that happens between the idea and the finished image. Sometimes I am able to capture that captivating moment in the very first shot, and at other times, I really have to work in order to find it. Take these photos of red roses from a few years ago. I love flowers, so it was an easy decision to lift my camera here. This is one of my first shots, and I'll be the first to admit it's pretty lousy, but it was informative. I was trying to determine what specifically drew me. I knew there was something, but I had not yet identified what it was. I decided to explore other details in the arrangement, such as this tendril on the side of a rose, the baby's breath, and even this green whatever it is. After a while, I decided nothing with any of those or the ones that followed was working for me. I was getting frustrated, bored, and losing light in my dining room. The lack of light was making getting close with my 30mm macro lens pretty difficult, so I stopped taking photos for the day. By this point, I'd been at it for about 2.5 hours with little satisfaction. One personal rule I always follow is to stop photographing the second I've identified boredom creeping in. The photos after that point are never any good anyways, because my intellect and my emotions, both vital components of my creative process, are no longer actively engaged. The next day, I resumed photographing largely because I could not bear the thought of wasting the roses, but also out of determination because I knew I had not gotten what I was after. On that first day, I had dumped my card into Lightroom, culled the photos, and identified my favorites. There weren't many. And most importantly, I studied and critiqued the photos. I asked myself why I liked each composition or why I did not. I'm sure I was not able to identify my reasons for every photo, but I knew they were vital questions to ask, and I knew it was a critical step. I was honing my artistic vision. I also began to realize that critique was much easier when I was helping my husband critique his work. The importance of self-critique has been drilled into my head, and so I trudged on. On that second day, I rearranged the dining room again and set to work. I was determined to come up with something I actually really liked. I knew it was there, somewhere. I felt with this image I was on the right track. My interest, which had started to wane the previous day, began to return. With this image, I was on to something. It still wasn't fantastic in my opinion, but I felt I was getting warmer. The whole time I was continually thinking and analyzing the light. I recall being tempted to take photos similar to ones I'd taken the day before, but I resisted the urge because I knew from studying the previous day's images that they weren't remotely close to what I wanted, so I kept at it, slowly fine-tuning each composition as I went. This image was getting closer. I almost really liked it. I began focusing more on the convergence of the lines, light, and shadows, as I had determined that all three working together in a specific manner was the key to what I had envisioned. In the time between the two sessions, and even as I kept working on that second day, I kept mulling over my work. I was beginning to like more shots, and they were beginning to come closer together. These next three images that I actually really liked were image 63, image number 64, and image number 66. And finally, the image I had been seeking, number 70, arrived after a mere 3.5 hours of photographing over 2 days. I knew I loved it just as soon as I took it. I could just feel it. I can't quite explain it, but for most of my favorite shots, my mind and emotions meet in a seeming agreement when the shutter clicks. I just know. And here is the final edited version of the image. I still love it. I had it printed as a 20 by 30 inch print for a past show, and now it hangs in my office not 2 feet from where I sit. 2 years later, it's still one of my favorite images. The delicate balance between the light, shadows, petal texture, and lines still moves me. The lessons from that session have been informing my photography ever since. I've learned to slow down and simplify, and then simplify some more. I'm on a mission to constantly exclude anything that does not add to the image. I'm continually learning to focus on the lines, light, and shadows, and how they converge as they represent the emotion in my work. If you are an artist who is still trying to find your voice or vision, keep analyzing and keep thinking about your process, and in time it will become evident. As my husband tells his students, just do the work. I'm Pamela Reynoso, and I hope you found this tutorial helpful as you continue on your creative journey.